the answer. We know what happened to our history. And two, we didn't know that there was an alternative view until these tablets were found. Because you have to study outside of your comfort level into areas of archaeology. And these tablets, by the way, are all over different museums and colleges and universities around the world. The French dug some up, the British did, Yale did, Philadelphia University did, so they're all over. Well, it only comes to the 20th century, the 1940s and 50s, when you have Samuel Noah Kramer, who's the preeminent Sumerologist of his era, combining and finding out and realizing, hey, these stories, these tablets are the same. Some of them were broken. He had to translate them. It could take a month to translate one tablet. And like I said, they found 1 million tablets, and most of them are administrative. But the ones that have to do with the history, mythology, or the stories of the gods, they weren't always translated so quickly. Most of the archaeologists and historians were doing Assyrian or Babylonian. But when they found the older tablets, it took one specific person to realize this, and then that became his specialty. And it took, like Jason said regarding dissemination, it took 40, 50 years to disseminate where we can talk about it now, having a big foundation of evidence behind what I'm saying. I have books and books of shelves of these tablets translated, some from the New York Metropolitan Museum in New York. 3 books that are 2 inches thick, each one of them has everything in their library translated. Well, unless you read it all yourself, you don't necessarily know what's in there. But lately, I think the paradigm is changing now, and it's very obvious to see the progression of language and the progression of stories is very easy to document now.
The technology that they had, and let's assume they fought here. In India, I was talking to Michael Cremo about this. He's our guest Wednesday night. In India, they describe what could be a nuclear fight between people on this planet. Might that have been the Anunnaki?
Oh, yes, it's quite possible. The Anunnaki in the Sumerian stories are the only beings that are here on Earth. That doesn't mean, or the only alien beings that are here on Earth. That doesn't mean that is the case. There could have been other groups here. But the stories of nuclear fighting or fighting to have big explosions is something familiar to people who know the Bible, because Sodom and Gomorrah were 2 cities that were destroyed by balls of fire or hail and brimstone.
Sure.
So we have evidence of this, and there's evidence on the ground in the area where Sodom and Gomorrah is thought to be of black, burnt-out type stones and rocks, and there's no lava or volcano activity in the area, and there's nothing to account for this type of change in the geology of those areas, except we have a story which happens to match the timing and the dating of when Abraham left, and everything seems to connect perfectly to 2025 BC. And then you have the lament tablets, which are talking about, the civilization was destroyed, but the buildings were not destroyed, but the people were killed. And there was a death cloud that came and went over the cities and destroyed things. So it would seem to indicate the kind of thing that we would call a nuclear disaster. It may have been a different technology, but it's the same effect. Buildings are not destroyed, but the people are killed. So this kind of evidence doesn't only exist in India, it also exists in Mesopotamia.
Well, that may be absolutely true. So are there other people like Zechariah out there who have investigated these Sumerian texts?
Well, sure. Right now there's many of them, and there's many authors now who talk about it. I work with Zechariah, so I tend to stick mostly with his stuff, but I buy a lot of corroborating type of books or evidence of scholars. Mostly, though, we look at stuff that's even older than Zechariah's, because the problem now is that anybody who writes after will use Zechariah as a source. So when I studied Zechariah's material, I actually studied his sources. So I went back to Samuel Noah Kramer and Stephen Langdon and old professors who originally dug up the tablets. And I wanted to see what they thought and what they translated. And the more I went back and the more I saw, the more I realized Zechariah's way of looking at it was correct.
Well, what did some of the original people say?
Well, I have a book here, just a simple little book, which talks about the calendars. And so the calendar has all the holidays that we're all familiar with from the Bible. It talks about the months and the names of the months and things that the king should do, and he shouldn't start a war on this day, and he should stay close to his castle on that day. Well, it turns out that a lot of these days, December 25th, or in the Hebrew calendar, Yom Kippur, or the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, all of these holidays have been holidays for thousands of years. They've always been important days. And just because another historical event happened on a day doesn't mean that something didn't happen prior to that. So that's what happens when you go back in time and you're looking at the archaeological record. What you're seeing is there's nothing new. It's all being copied from something more.
Is there anything in those tablets that you don't agree with in terms of what the Zechariah has done? Or do you believe what his interpretations are, totally?
Well, I have we do have a disagreement whether the Yahweh character of the Bible was a real physical being, and he consumed food and ate like the Anunnaki gods were known to do. And by the way, the Anunnaki gods would only eat from gold bowls or gold cups.
Oh, really? Why?
Yep. Well, they were picky.
Fussy, yeah.
And it may have been their biology. We don't know. It could have been that they were allergic to other things. We don't know how pure they were necessarily and what kind, how pure they wanted their food and drink. Also, they would not eat meat before midday. And that's a funny thing. Jews only would eat like salmon or fish in the morning, but never meat. Like it's a popular thing to have sausage or bacon in the morning, but for some reason the Hebrew people won't do that. And the Anunnaki didn't have meat before midday. So when Moses was in the desert with Yahweh's cloud over him and they were traveling with his tabernacle, they were giving sacrifices. So I always thought, well, maybe the sacrifices were meant to give food and nourishment to the god. So that's kind of a disagreement that we're not, there's no evidence that Yahweh actually consumed, but yet the story after the flood is that he smelled the pleasing aroma of the sacrifice that Noah was giving. Now, I know that the story is actually talking about the other Anunnaki gods who did consume. So the question is, what characteristics were Yahweh only, and what characteristics were picked up from the prior gods' descriptions?
Wouldn't you have liked to have lived during that era, Eric? My gosh.
Well, to have seen it firsthand, yeah. I would have loved to see some of the miracles and some of these events that happened. But what's funny, George? Even though these Israelites witnessed the 10 plagues and everything that the God did for them,
sure,
they still didn't believe. They still had a problem with their faith. They seem to have always had a problem with their faith, even though they were witnessing the stuff firsthand. And I always found that very interesting.
Would these beings, obviously, they came down in craft?
Yes, they were physical craft, chemical or fuel-based, and we know this because their landing sites and their launching sites are gigantic stone platforms throughout the ancient world. Baalbek, Lebanon is one of them, an example of gigantic stones. And, I've been to Malta, I've been to the pyramids. I just don't know why ancient man has to work with such gigantic stone blocks. What's the point?
What if there were giants here?
Well, see, that's funny. That is very possible because the actual word for giant in Hebrew is Anakim.
Oh, really?
Which is Anak. Now, you have the Anunnaki and you have Enki. And if you think of the word without vowels, because back then they didn't have vowels as letters, they used little dots and lines for vowels, you have basically A-N-K is Anaki, giant, Enki, or Anunnaki.
Does the word Nephilim ever come up in the Sumerian tablets?
Not that word, because that's from an Akkadian root. But
Okay.
The word Nephilim means two different things. It means from the root Nephal, those who've come down, okay, which is the same meaning as Anunnaki, those
Right.
who from heaven to earth came. So you have Anakim, the sound of Anunnaki, meaning the word giant in Hebrew. Then you have the translation of what Anunnaki means becoming the same meaning as the word Nephilim. This is how we can translate and go back in time through the language. One word in Hebrew keeps the meaning, and one word in Hebrew keeps the sound of the original word. And it becomes two different words. I'll give you another example, like
Please,
the word Adam. Adam is man. But Adam is also a compound word. It means dam, blood. Adom is red. Adama means clay, and it's red clay. And so Adam's name encompasses red, earth, clay, and blood.
That is something.
And so that's why you
Good
get
interpretation.
So Hebrew picks up not just the sound of the words, but the meanings of several words and puts them into a single root. And then you have the root then puts things on the end of it or in the front of it.
What about the misinterpretations? I bet that's out there too, isn't it?
Well, yeah. The biggest misinterpretation, George, is the first time the word God was used in the ancient Sumerian stories and didn't even mean God. The original word for God was Din-gir, and Din is the word righteous or holy, like Eden, right?